Staff Sergeant Pritchard's fist stopped 3 inches from the old man's face. He had expected fear. He had expected the janitor to flinch, to cower, to remember his place. What he had not expected was the small hand now wrapped around his wrist. Corporal Vance stood barely 5'4", and until 10 seconds ago, Pritchard had not known she existed. But the way she held his arm, the precise angle of her grip on pressure points he did not know existed, told him something was very wrong. 5 minutes earlier, the corridor outside Building 6240 had been quiet. Mr. Teodoro Basilio pushed his mop bucket along the polished floor, humming a melody from his childhood in Manila. 22 years he had worked at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar. 22 years of cleaning floors, emptying trash, and watching young Marines come and go. He had seen thousands of them. Most were good. Some were not. Staff Sergeant Declan Pritchard was the worst he had encountered in 2 decades. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed someone stand up against a bully when no one else would. The mop caught a wet spot Mr. Basilio had not noticed, and the bucket tipped. Dirty water splashed across the floor, catching the boots of Staff Sergeant Pritchard as he rounded the corner with 3 of his followers. Pritchard stopped, looked down at his boots, then looked up at the old man with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "You stupid old fool," Pritchard said, his voice echoing off the walls. "Do you have any idea how much these boots cost? More than you make in a month pushing that pathetic mop around." Mr. Basilio bowed his head. "I am sorry, Staff Sergeant. I will clean them right away." "Clean them?" Pritchard stepped closer, towering over the elderly janitor. "You think you could just splash your filth on a Marine, and everything is fine? What are you even doing here? This is a military installation, not a nursing home for washed-up foreigners." 3 other Marines stood behind Pritchard, none of them speaking, none of them moving to intervene. Lance Corporal Finn Hollister felt his stomach turn, but kept his eyes forward. He had seen what happened to people who crossed Staff Sergeant Pritchard. He had the fading bruise on his ribs to prove it. Mr. Basilio kept his head down. His hands trembled slightly around the mop handle. 50 years ago, he had run through rice paddies under enemy fire to drag wounded Marines to safety. He had held dying boys in his arms and told them they would be okay. He had earned a Bronze Star for valor that sat in a drawer at home because he never felt comfortable wearing it. But none of that mattered now. Now he was just an old man with a mop, and the young staff sergeant before him saw nothing but weakness. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Pritchard demanded. Mr. Basilio raised his eyes. There was no defiance in them, only the quiet dignity of a man who had survived too much to be broken by words. That dignity enraged Pritchard more than resistance would have. "You know what I think?" Pritchard said, stepping even closer. "I think you did that on purpose. I think you have been watching me, waiting for your chance to disrespect me." "Is that it, old man?" "No, Staff Sergeant. It was an accident. I am very sorry." Pritchard's hand shot out and knocked the mop from Mr. Basilio's grip. It clattered to the floor, the sound sharp in the silent corridor. "Pick it up," Pritchard ordered. Mr. Basilio bent slowly, his knees protesting, and retrieved the mop. Pritchard knocked it away again. "Too slow. Pick it up faster." The old man bent again, and again the mop was slapped from his hands. The 3 Marines behind Pritchard shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke. This was how it always went. Pritchard found someone who could not fight back, and he pushed until he was satisfied. "What is the matter?" Pritchard laughed. "Those old bones not working so well anymore? Maybe it is time you retired. Maybe it is time someone helped you understand you do not belong here." He drew back his fist. That was when she appeared. Corporal Alara Vance had been walking from the supply office to the administrative building, a stack of requisition forms in her arms. She was small, quiet, the kind of Marine who disappeared into the background of any room. She had been at Miramar for 8 months, and most people on base could not have picked her out of a lineup. She preferred it that way, but she had seen the scene unfolding in the corridor, seen the old man's dignity and the young staff sergeant's cruelty, seen the 3 Marines frozen in fear, and something inside her, something she had tried very hard to bury, refused to look away. The requisition forms scattered across the floor as she moved. Pritchard's fist never reached its target. "That is enough, Staff Sergeant." Her voice was calm, quiet, but it carried a weight that made everyone in the corridor turn. Pritchard stared at the small hand wrapped around his wrist. He tried to pull free and found he could not. The grip was precise, fingers pressed into points that sent warning signals shooting up his arm. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Corporal Vance. Supply Services. And you're going to step away from this man now." Pritchard's face twisted with disbelief. A corporal, a female corporal barely tall enough to reach his shoulder, was giving him orders. Him, the man who had never lost a fight on this base. The man whose father's connections reached all the way to the colonel's office. He laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, little girl." Alara released his wrist. She stepped back, putting herself between Pritchard and Mr. Basilio. Her posture was relaxed, but something in her eyes made Pritchard hesitate. Something that did not belong in a supply clerk. Something that looked like it had seen things he could not imagine. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," she said quietly. "The question is whether you do." For a long moment, nobody moved. The corridor held its breath. Then Pritchard smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "This is not over," he said. "Not even close." He turned and walked away, his followers trailing behind him. At the corner, he paused and looked back at her one final time. "Find out everything about her," he said to the Marine beside him. "Everything." Mr. Basilio touched Alara's arm gently. "Thank you," he said. "You did not have to do that." She bent to gather her scattered forms, her hands steady despite everything. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." She did not see the old man studying her with eyes that had witnessed 50 years of warriors. Eyes that recognized something in her stillness that her uniform could not hide. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara. Alara Vance." Mr. Basilio nodded slowly. "I am Teodoro, and I think, Corporal Vance, that Staff Sergeant Pritchard has made a very serious mistake today." Alara said nothing. She simply gathered her papers and walked away, disappearing into the maze of corridors as if she had never been there at all. But in the shadows of Building 6240, Lance Corporal Hollister remained frozen, replaying what he had just witnessed. He had seen Pritchard fight. He had felt Pritchard's strength firsthand. And he had just watched a woman half Pritchard's size stop his fist like it was nothing. That was not luck. That was not adrenaline. That was something else entirely. And from the look on Pritchard's face as he walked away, Hollister knew the staff sergeant was thinking the same thing. Alara's hands did not start shaking until she reached her desk. She set the requisition forms down and pressed her palms flat against the surface, willing the tremor to stop. It had been 18 months since she had touched another person with intent. 18 months since she had felt that familiar calm settle over her body, the muscle memory taking control before her mind could catch up. She had promised herself it was over. She had promised herself she was done. The supply office hummed with the mundane sounds of administrative work. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the soft murmur of Marines discussing inventory shortages and equipment requests. Nobody noticed the small corporal in the corner struggling to breathe. "Vance, you good?" She looked up to find Corporal Daniels watching her from the next desk. He was young, fresh from his MOS school, still eager enough to notice when something was wrong. "Fine," she said. "Just dropped some papers in the hallway. Had to pick them up." Daniels nodded and turned back to his computer, already forgetting the moment. That was the gift of being invisible. People accepted simple explanations because they were not looking for complicated ones. The afternoon crawled by. Alara forced herself to focus on requisition forms and inventory spreadsheets, but her mind kept returning to the corridor, to Pritchard's eyes when she had gripped his wrist. The confusion there, the anger, and beneath both, something she recognized all too well. The wounded pride of a predator who had suddenly discovered he might be prey. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. "Gunnery Sergeant Ramona Castellano, Base Legal Services. Need to see you. My office. Now." Alara's stomach tightened. Ramona was the closest thing she had to a friend on base, but a summons to legal was never good news. The legal services office occupied a corner of Building 1100, far from the administrative bustle of Alera's workspace. Ramona was waiting at her desk, her expression unreadable. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that made junior Marines instinctively straighten their posture. "Close the door," she said. Alera complied. "Sit down." She sat. Ramona leaned back in her chair and studied her for a long moment. "Word travels fast on this base. You want to tell me what happened with Staff Sergeant Pritchard? He was harassing an elderly civilian employee. I asked him to stop." "You asked him to stop," Ramona repeated. "That is not the version I heard. The version I heard involves you grabbing his wrist and physically preventing him from striking someone." Alera said nothing. Ramona sighed. "Do you have any idea who Declan Pritchard is?" "His father was a colonel. Retired now, but his old friends still run half the command structure on this base. Pritchard has been pulling this garbage for years, and nobody touches him because everybody knows what happens to people who try. I did not try anything. I just stopped him from hitting an old man. And that is exactly the problem." Ramona leaned forward. "You embarrassed him, Alera, in front of his people. Men like Pritchard do not forget that. They do not forgive it, and they definitely do not let it go." The words settled over Alera like a weight. She had known, of course. The moment she had stepped into that corridor, she had known there would be consequences. But the alternative had been watching an innocent man get hurt, and that was something she could not do. Not anymore. Not after everything. "There is something else," Ramona said carefully. "Pritchard has been asking questions about you, trying to access your personnel file." Alera's breath caught. "He does not have the clearance," Ramona continued. "Not even close. But he has friends who do. And your file has some interesting gaps in it, Alera. The kind of gaps that make people curious. My file is classified for a reason." "I know." Ramona's voice softened. "I'm not asking you to tell me what is in there, but I need you to understand what you are dealing with. Pritchard runs an unofficial fight club out of the base gym. After hours, no cameras, no witnesses. He has put 3 Marines in the hospital this year alone, and not one of them filed a complaint. That is the kind of fear he generates." Alera thought about the young lance corporal who had stood frozen in the corridor. The fading bruise she had glimpsed beneath his sleeve when he shifted. Hollister. That was his name. She had seen his type before. Good Marines broken down by bad leaders. "What does he want?" she asked. Ramona shook her head. "Right now, he wants to know who you are. He wants to understand why a supply clerk stopped his punch like it was nothing. And when he figures out he cannot get answers through official channels, he is going to come looking for them himself." The warning hung in the air between them. Alera understood what Ramona was not saying. Run. Transfer. Disappear before this gets worse. But running was what she had been doing for 18 months. Running from Syria. Running from the woman she had been. Running from the ghost that still visited her at 3 in the morning when the base was quiet and her mind would not stop replaying the sounds of combat. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I appreciate it." Ramona studied her for a long moment. "Just be careful, Alera. Whatever is in that file of yours, it will not matter if Pritchard catches you alone." Alera left the legal office and walked across the base toward the mess hall. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and she found herself scanning the faces of every Marine she passed, looking for threats, calculating distances and angles, the old habits rising up like muscle memory. She hated that it felt so natural. The mess hall was half empty at this hour, the lunch rush long over and dinner still hours away. She grabbed a tray and moved through the line on autopilot, barely registering what she put on her plate. Corporal Vance. She turned to find Mr. Basilio standing behind her, his own tray in hand. He had changed out of his work clothes into a simple button-down shirt, and up close she could see the faded ink of a tattoo on his forearm. An anchor with a cross. Navy Corpsman insignia. "Mr. Basilio," she said, "how are you feeling?" He smiled gently. "I have survived worse than harsh words from angry young men. May I join you?" They found a table in the corner, away from the few other Marines scattered around the room. Mr. Basilio ate slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "What you did today was very brave. Alara shook her head. It was not brave. It was just the right thing to do. The old man chuckled softly. In my experience, those are often the same thing. He paused, his eyes growing distant. I was a Navy corpsman in Vietnam. Did you know that? I saw your tattoo. He nodded. 50 years ago, I was running through jungles trying to keep boys alive. I have seen courage in many forms, Corporal Vance. I have seen men charge into fire to save their brothers. I have seen medics work for hours on wounds that could not be healed, refusing to give up. And I have seen people walk away from fights they could have won because they knew that winning was not the same as being right. He met her eyes, and there was something knowing in his gaze. I have also seen the look that you carry, the stillness, the way you watch everything and everyone, always calculating. It is the look of someone who has been to very dark places and found their way back. Alara's throat tightened. Mr. Basilio, I am just a supply clerk. Of course you are. He smiled again, but this time there was sadness in it. And I am just an old janitor. We are whatever we need to be, yes? Whatever helps us sleep at night. He rose from the table, gathering his tray. Be careful, Corporal Vance. Staff Sergeant Pritchard is not a good man. But I think you already know that. And I think you know something else too. What is that? Mr. Basilio paused, looking down at her with eyes that had seen half a century of warriors. I think you know exactly what you are capable of. The question is whether you are ready to remember. He walked away, leaving Alara alone with her untouched food and the weight of his words. That night, in her small quarters on the edge of base housing, she opened a box she had not touched in 18 months. Inside lay a black belt, worn smooth from years of use. Photographs of young Marines in training gear. A medal in a velvet case, its ribbon faded. And beneath it all, a single photograph. 8 soldiers standing in the Syrian desert, smiling at the camera. 7 of them had made it home. Alara touched the face of the one who had not. Then she closed the box and slid it back under her bed. But she did not sleep. The sun had set by the time Alara walked to her car. Parking lot C was nearly empty, the overhead lights casting pale circles across the asphalt. Her keys were already in her hand, a habit she had never been able to break. Always ready, always aware. She saw him before he spoke, a shadow leaning against the driver's side door of her vehicle. Tall, broad, arms crossed over his chest like he owned the space and everything in it. Staff Sergeant Pritchard smiled as she approached. Corporal Vance, we need to talk. Alara stopped 10 feet away, close enough to hear him, far enough to react if she needed to. The calculation was automatic, instinctive, and she hated herself for how easily it came. I do not think we do, she said. Pritchard pushed off in the car and took a step toward her. No witnesses here, no old men to protect, just you and me and a conversation that is long overdue. If you have something to say, Staff Sergeant, you can say it during duty hours through proper channels. He laughed. The sound was ugly in the darkness. Proper channels. That is cute. You think proper channels mean anything to me? My father spent 30 years building relationships on this base. Generals have dinner at his house. Colonels ask his advice. And you think some supply clerk is going to hide behind regulations? Another step closer. Alara held her ground. I know you have been asking about me, she said. I know you have been trying to access my file. Pritchard's smile faltered for just a moment. So you have friends too. Good. That makes this more interesting. There is nothing interesting about this. You were harassing a civilian employee. I stopped you. That is the end of the story. No. Pritchard's voice dropped lower, harder. That is the beginning of the story. See, I have been running this base for 3 years. 3 years, and nobody has ever stood up to me. Nobody has ever dared. And then you come along, this nobody from nowhere, and you grab my wrist like you have been waiting for the chance. He was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the vein pulsing in his temple. I want to know who you are, he continued. I want to know why a desk jockey moves like she's been trained. I want to know what is in that classified file of yours that has everyone so nervous. Alara met his eyes without flinching. You want to know who I am? I am someone who is going to get in her car and drive home now. And you're going to step aside and let me. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Pritchard reached out and shoved her. Hard. Both hands to her shoulders, sending her stumbling backward. She caught herself, absorbed the momentum, did not fall, and did not strike back. Pritchard watched her with hungry eyes, waiting for a reaction, waiting for her to give him an excuse. That is interesting, he said slowly. Most people would have swung at me for that. But you just took it. Either you're a coward, or you're something else entirely. Alara said nothing. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. The old calm was settling over her like a familiar weight, and she could feel the edges of herself starting to blur. The supply clerk fading. Something else rising to take her place. She could not let that happen. Not here. Not like this. I'm going to give you a choice, Pritchard continued. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, base gym. You show up, and we settle this like adults. You do not show up. I make your life on this base a living hell. Reassignment requests that never get processed. Equipment that goes missing. Performance reviews that tank your career before it starts. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. And that old janitor you like so much? Accidents happen on military bases all the time. Be a shame if he slipped on a wet floor and broke something important. The threat hung in the air like poison. Alara's voice was barely a whisper. If you touch him, I will end you. Pritchard pulled back, grinning. There she is. There is the woman I have been looking for. Tomorrow night, Corporal. Do not be late. He walked away into the darkness, leaving her alone in the empty parking lot with her racing pulse and the terrible knowledge of what she was capable of becoming. She drove home on autopilot, barely registering the roads or the traffic lights. In her quarters, she locked the door and leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor with her knees drawn to her chest. Her phone was in her hand before she realized she had pulled it out. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she had not called in over a year. A number she had promised herself she would never need again. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Alara? Is that you? Master Sergeant Cross. Her old instructor. The man who had turned her into what she was. It is happening again, she said. I thought I could leave it behind. I thought I could be someone else. A long pause on the other end of the line. Tell me everything, Cross said. She told him. The janitor. The corridor. Pritchard's threats. The challenge for tomorrow night. And the thing she feared most of all. I could feel it coming back, she whispered. That place in my head where everything goes quiet. Where I stop thinking and just react. In Syria, that place kept me alive. But here, in the real world, I do not know if I can control it. Cross was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. You remember what I taught you. The techniques are tools, not instincts. You choose when to use them. And if I choose wrong? Alara's voice cracked. What if I hurt someone who does not deserve it? What if I become the thing I am trying to escape? Then you live with it, Cross said simply. Just like the rest of us. But Alara, running for what you are does not make you less dangerous. It just makes you unprepared when the moment comes. She closed her eyes. I do not want to be a weapon anymore. Then do not be. Be a person who knows how to fight. There's a difference. A weapon does not choose. A person does. The words echoed in her mind long after she hung up the phone. The next morning, Alara arrived at work to find her desk had been moved. The spacious corner spot she had occupied for 8 months was gone, replaced by a cramped station in a windowless alcove near the supply closet. Her computer was missing. Her files had been scattered. Equipment malfunction, Corporal Daniels explained with an apologetic shrug. IT is working on it. Should have you back up by end of week. She knew better. This was Pritchard's doing. The opening move in a campaign designed to break her. Throughout the day, small indignities accumulated. A requisition she had filed months ago came back rejected with her signature forged incorrectly. A meeting she was supposed to attend had been rescheduled without her knowledge. Her access card failed at 2 different buildings before mysteriously working again. By lunch, half the base seemed to know about the confrontation in the corridor. Marines she had never spoken to watched her with curious eyes. Some with sympathy, others with the predatory interest of people waiting to see someone fall. It was Lance Corporal Hollister who finally approached her. He found her sitting alone outside the mess hall, staring at nothing. Corporal Vance? Can I talk to you for a second? She looked up at him, saw the nervous way he shifted his weight, the way his eyes darted around, checking for witnesses. What do you want, Lance Corporal? He sat down across from her, lowering his voice. I wanted to say I am sorry. For yesterday. For not doing anything when Pritchard was going after Mr. Basilio. Ilera studied him. The fading bruise on his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. He has hurt you before, she said. It was not a question. Hollister nodded slowly. A few months ago, I made the mistake of beating him at poker. He did not like that. Caught me alone after a training exercise. And you never reported it. Hollister laughed bitterly. Report it to who? His friends run the investigation office. His father's buddies sit on every review board. Guys who cross Pritchard do not get justice. They get transferred to the worst postings the Corps has to offer. He met her eyes. But you stopped him. You actually stopped him. I have never seen anyone do that. I did not stop anything, Ilera said quietly. I just delayed it. Maybe. Hollister leaned forward. But that is more than anyone else has done. And I wanted you to know that some of us see it. Some of us remember what it looked like when someone finally stood up. He rose from the table. Be careful tonight, he added. Whatever happens at that gym, Pritchard is not going to fight fair. He walked away before she could respond. And Ilera sat alone with the weight of choice she had not yet made, feeling the clock tick down towards something she could not avoid. By mid-afternoon, the rumors had evolved into something uglier. Ilera heard them in fragments as she moved through the base. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Sideways glances that lingered too long. She is unstable. Snapped in Syria. Killed her own people. The words spread like wildfire through the barracks and offices of Miramar. Pritchard had been busy. Whatever he could not learn from her classified file, he had invented. And the lies he told were far more damaging than any truth could have been. Corporal Vance was involved in a friendly fire incident. That is why her record is sealed. She spent 6 months in a military psychiatric facility, discharged early because they could not handle her. I heard she killed a superior officer who tried to restrain her during a psychotic episode. None of it was true, but truth had never been the point. The point was to isolate her, to make her toxic, to ensure that when Pritchard finally destroyed her, no one would care enough to ask questions. Ilera sat in her cramped workspace and pretended not to notice the way her co-workers avoided eye contact, pretended not to see the fear in their faces when she walked past. She had been invisible before by choice. Now she was invisible because people were afraid of what she might do. The irony was not lost on her. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ramona. Mess hall. Now. Urgent. She found the gunnery sergeant waiting at a corner table, her expression grim. Sit down, Ramona said. We need to talk about what Pritchard is saying about you. I have heard the rumors. They are not just rumors anymore. Ramona slid a folder across the table. Someone filed a formal complaint this morning. Anonymous, of course, alleging that you have a history of violent outbursts and pose a danger to personnel on this base. They are requesting a psychological evaluation and immediate suspension of your duties pending investigation. Ilera stared at the folder. She did not open it. This is Pritchard, she said. Obviously, but that does not matter. The complaint has been filed through official channels. Even with his connections, he could not make something like this disappear if we had evidence to counter it. The problem is that your file is classified. Nobody can see what actually happened in Syria. And in the absence of facts, people believe whatever story sounds the most interesting. Ilera closed her eyes. 3 years ago, her classified status had been a shield. Now it was a weapon being used against her. Can you give me the real file? She asked. Ramona hesitated. I already did. Ilera opened her eyes. The gunnery sergeant reached into her bag and pulled out a second folder. This one was thicker, marked with security stamps that should have been well above her clearance level. I called in every favor I have ever earned, Ramona said quietly. What I found, Ilera, it does not match anything Pritchard is saying. It does not even come close. She opened the folder and began to read aloud. September 14th. Corporal Ilera Vance was part of a convoy providing security for a humanitarian mission in northern Syria. The convoy was ambushed by approximately 50 hostile combatants. In the initial attack, Corporal Vance's vehicle was disabled by an improvised explosive device. She sustained shrapnel wounds to her left shoulder and leg, but refused evacuation. Ramona paused, her eyes scanning ahead. Over the next 9 hours, Corporal Vance held a defensive position protecting 7 wounded Marines who could not be moved. She engaged enemy combatants at ranges from 300 meters to hand-to-hand distance. Official count lists 47 enemy killed in action during the engagement. 12 of those kills occurred in close-quarters combat during the final 2 hours when ammunition was exhausted. The words hung in the air between them. "You killed 12 men with your hands," Ramona said slowly. "In 2 hours, while wounded, protecting people who could not protect themselves." Alara said nothing. The memories were there, buried beneath 18 months of carefully constructed distance. The smell of blood and cordite. The screams. The terrible silence that came after. "There is more," Ramona continued. Corporal Vance was recommended for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. She declined the award and requested transfer to non-combat duties. Psychological evaluation noted no signs of instability, violence, or danger to others. Evaluation noted instead a profound moral injury related to the taking of human life, even in justified circumstances. Recommendation was for administrative assignment to allow processing of trauma in low-stress environment. Ramona closed the folder. "You're not a monster, Alara. You are a hero who does not want to be one. And Pritchard is trying to destroy you because you had the courage to stop him from hurting an old man." Alara finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I spent 2 hours killing people with my bare hands. I felt their bones break. I felt them stop breathing. And the worst part, Ramona, the worst part is that I was good at it. I was so good at it that I scared myself." She looked up, and there were tears in her eyes. "That is why I requested the transfer. Not because I was broken, because I was afraid of what I might become if I stayed in that world. I was afraid that the next time, I would not be able to stop." Ramona reached across the table and took her hand. "You stopped Pritchard without hurting him. You could have broken his wrist in that corridor. You could have put him on the ground before he knew what was happening. But you did not. You chose restraint. This time," Alara pulled her hand away. "But he is not going to stop. And sooner or later, I'm going to have to make a choice I cannot take back." She rose from the table. "Thank you for showing me the file. At least now I know what I'm fighting for." Alara left the mess hall and walked toward the administrative building where Mr. Basilio worked his afternoon shift. She found him in the corridor outside Building 6240, the same corridor where everything had started. He was mopping the floor with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything. "Mr. Basilio." He looked up and smiled. "Corporal Vance, I was hoping I would see you today." She glanced around to make sure they were alone. "I need you to be careful. Pritchard made threats last night. About you." The old man nodded slowly. "I have heard." He leaned on his mop and studied her with knowing eyes. "I have also heard what he is saying about you. The lies he is spreading. I am sorry. I never meant to drag you into this." Mr. Basilio shook his head. "You did not drag me into anything. I have been watching Declan Pritchard hurt people on this base for 3 years. Young Marines who were too afraid to speak. Civilian workers who had no one to protect them. I have seen it all, and I have said nothing because I told myself it was not my place." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But you reminded me of something I had forgotten. Sometimes the only thing evil needs to win is for good people to stay silent. You spoke up, Corporal Vance. You stood between a bully and his victim. That is not something to apologize for. That is something to be proud of." Alara felt her throat tighten. "He threatened to hurt you, to make it look like an accident. I survived the Tet offensive," Mr. Basilio said gently. "I held dying boys in my arms and promised them they would see their mothers again. I have faced worse than a spoiled child with a temper." He reached out and touched her arm. "Whatever happens tonight, know that you are not alone. There are people on this base who see you, who know what you did for me, and who will remember." Alara could not find words. She simply nodded. Mr. Basilio picked up his mop and returned to work. And Alara walked away, carrying the weight of a truth she had tried to bury and the growing certainty that tonight, one way or another, everything was going to change. Alara did not sleep that night either. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift as headlights from passing vehicles swept across her window. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in Syria, back in the dust and the blood and the terrible clarity that came when survival stripped everything else away. She had killed her first man at 19, a combatant who had come through the window of a building she was defending. She remembered his face, the surprise in his eyes when her training took over, the way his body had gone limp in her hands. She remembered all of them, every single one. Master Sergeant Cross had told her once that the kills would fade, that eventually they would become statistics instead of memories. He had been wrong, or maybe he had been lying to make her feel better. Either way, she carried each of them with her like stones in her pockets, weighing her down with every step. By the time the sun rose, she had made her decision. She would face Pritchard, not because she wanted to fight, not because she had anything to prove, but because running would not make him stop. Running would just leave him free to hurt the next person who crossed his path. The next Lance Corporal Hollister. The next Mr. Basilio. The morning passed in a blur of routine tasks and avoided conversations. Her co-workers had fully embraced the distance now, treating her like a live grenade that might detonate at any moment. She let them. It was easier than trying to explain. At noon, word spread through the base like electricity through water. Tonight, base gym, 9 o'clock. Pritchard versus the supply clerk. Marines she had never met stopped to stare at her in the corridors. Some with pity, some with morbid curiosity, a few with something that might have been respect, though they were careful not to show it where Pritchard's friends might see. The afternoon brought a visitor she did not expect. Lance Corporal Hollister found her in the parking lot during her lunch break. She had taken to eating in her car, away from the whispers and the watching eyes. "Corporal Vance," he said, sliding into the passenger seat without asking permission. "I need to talk to you." Alara studied him. The nervous energy was still there, but underneath it she saw something else. Determination. "I know you're going tonight," Hollister continued. "Everyone knows. And I need you to understand what you are walking into." "I know what I'm walking into." "No." He shook his head. "You do not. Pritchard's Fight Club is not just sparring. It is not even really fighting. It is punishment. He picks targets, people who have crossed him, people he wants to break. And he breaks them. Systematically. Brutally. The 3 Marines he put in the hospital this year, they did not lose fights. They were made examples." Alara said nothing. "He has a system," Hollister pressed on. "He lets you think you have a chance. Lets you land a few hits, get your confidence up. And then he takes you apart piece by piece. Make sure everyone watching knows exactly how outmatched you were. It is not about winning for him. It is about humiliation." "Why are you telling me this?" Hollister met her eyes. "Because I was one of his examples. 3 months ago, after the poker game, he could have just beaten me. Instead, he made it last 20 minutes. Made sure I knew exactly how powerless I was. And when it was over, he stood over me and said that if I ever told anyone, he would make it look like I attacked him first." His voice cracked slightly. "I have never told anyone that. Not until now." Alara felt something shift in her chest. The weight she had been carrying since Syria, the guilt and the fear and the isolation, it was not hers alone. There were others on this base carrying their own stones, their own memories of powerlessness and pain. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why tell me?" "Because you stopped him." Hollister's voice was fierce. "For 1 second, in that corridor, someone stopped him. And I need to know that tonight is not going to end with you broken on the floor of that gym while everyone watches and does nothing. I need to know there is a chance." Alara looked out the windshield at the base sprawling before them, the buildings and the vehicles and the flags snapping in the coastal wind. All of it functioning under the unspoken rule that Declan Pritchard was untouchable. "There is always a chance," she said finally. "But I need you to understand something, Hollister. What happens tonight is not going to be pretty. It is not going to be a fair fight. And when it is over, things on this base are going to change. For better or worse." Hollister nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to watch. And when it is done, I need you to tell the truth about what you saw. Not what Pritchard's friends say happened. What actually happened. The young Marine straightened in his seat. I can do that. He opened the car door, then paused. Corporal Vance? For what it is worth, I do not believe any of the things they're saying about you. The friendly fire, the psychiatric stuff. None of it. Why not? Hollister smiled grimly. Because a psycho would not have stopped with just grabbing his wrist. A psycho would have put him through the wall. He climbed out of the car and walked away. Alara sat alone, turning his words over in her mind. He was right, of course. She could have ended Pritchard in that corridor without breaking a sweat. Could have shattered bones and torn ligaments before anyone knew what was happening. But she had not. She had chosen restraint. Chosen to be a person instead of a weapon. The question was whether she could make that same choice tonight. The hours crawled by. 5 o'clock. 6. 7. The sun dipped toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Alara returned to her quarters and stood before the mirror, studying her reflection. Small, unassuming, the kind of woman people looked past without a second glance. She had cultivated that image carefully. The loose uniforms that hid her muscle definition. The quiet demeanor that suggested timidity rather than control. The desk job that kept her far from anything resembling combat. All of a costume. A character she had created to escape the woman she had been. 8 o'clock. She opened the box under her bed one final time. The black belt. The photographs. The medal she had refused to accept. She did not put on the belt. Did not take any of it with her. Those things belonged to someone else. Someone she was trying not to be. But as she walked out the door, she carried their weight anyway. 8:30. Mr. Basilio was waiting outside her building. You should not be here, she said. He shook his head. Where else would I be? You stood up for me. Now I stand with you. If something happens to you because of this, I will never forgive myself. The old man smiled. Nothing is going to happen to me, Corporal Vance. But something's going to happen to you. Tonight, you're going to remember who you are. He touched her shoulder gently. Not the weapon, not the killer, the protector, the woman who held a position for 9 hours to save wounded Marines. That is who you are. That is who you have always been. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes. How did you know about that? Mr. Basilio winked. I told you. Old Janitor's hear everything. He stepped back and gestured toward the gym, its lights glowing in the gathering darkness. Go, he said. Show them what courage looks like. Alara walked toward the gym alone, her footsteps steady on the pavement. Behind her, the last light of day faded from the sky. Ahead of her, Declan Pritchard was waiting. The base gym was a squat concrete building that had seen better decades. During the day, it hummed with the ordinary sounds of fitness. Weights clanking, treadmills whirring, Marines pushing themselves through regulation workouts. At night, it became something else entirely. Alara paused at the entrance, taking in the scene before her. The main floor had been cleared of equipment, pushed to the edges to create an open space in the center. Thick mats covered the concrete, the kind used for combatives training. Portable lights had been set up around the perimeter, casting harsh shadows across the room. And everywhere she looked, there were Marines. 50 of them at least, maybe more, standing along the walls, sitting on stacked weight benches, crowding near the entrance to the mat room where the real action would take place. Their faces were a mixture of excitement and unease, the expressions of people who knew they were witnessing something they should not be part of but could not look away. She saw Hollister near the back, his jaw tight with tension. Saw a few other faces she recognized from the administrative building, people who had avoided her all day but had still come to watch. And near the front, surrounded by his inner circle, she saw Staff Sergeant Declan Pritchard. He was already on the mats, warming up with exaggerated movements designed to showcase his size and strength. His black belt was wrapped around his waist like a trophy, the fabric worn from years of use. When he saw her enter, his face split into a predatory grin. Corporal Vance, I was starting to think you would not show. Alara walked through the crowd without responding. Marines parted before her, some stepping back quickly as if her mere proximity was dangerous. The rumors had done their work. She was not just an opponent anymore. She was a cautionary tale, a warning about what happened to people who challenged the natural order. She stopped at the edge of the mats. "I am here," she said quietly. "Let Mr. Basilio leave first." Pritchard laughed. "The old man? He is not going anywhere. He has got a front row seat to watch his guardian angel get her wings clipped." He gestured toward the side of the room. Alara followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. Mr. Basilio was seated on a folding chair near the mats. Two of Pritchard's followers stood on either side of him, not touching him, but close enough to make their purpose clear. The old man's face was calm, but Alara could see the tightness around his eyes. "You did not need to involve him," she said. "I did not need to do a lot of things." Pritchard stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "But you embarrassed me, Corporal. You made me look weak in front of my people. And now everyone on this base is going to watch me put you in your place." He straightened and raised his voice for the crowd. "Standard rules. No weapons. No eye gouges. Fight continues until submission or knockout." He paused, smiling. "Or until one of us cannot continue." The crowd murmured. Alara understood what he was really saying. There would be no referee, no one to stop things if they went too far. This was not a competition. It was an execution. She stepped onto the mats. The surface was familiar beneath her feet. How many hours had she spent on mats just like these? How many bodies had she thrown? How many techniques had she drilled until they became as natural as breathing? All that felt like another lifetime now. Pritchard circled to face her, his movements loose and confident. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. His reach exceeded hers by nearly a foot. By every conventional measure, this fight should have been over before it started. "Last chance to walk away," he said. "Apologize in front of everyone. Admit you were wrong to interfere, and maybe I'll let you leave with just a few bruises." Alara said nothing. She was watching his feet, his shoulders, the subtle shifts in weight that would telegraph his first move. "No." Pritchard shrugged. "Your funeral." He exploded forward. The attack was fast, faster than she had expected. A straight punch aimed at her face, followed by a knee strike designed to catch her if she ducked. Classic aggressive opening. Designed to overwhelm. Designed to end things quickly. Alara was not there. She moved before his fist arrived, sliding to the side with an economy of motion that made the dodge look effortless. His punch cut through empty air. His knee found nothing. The crowd went silent. Pritchard recovered quickly, spinning to face her with confusion flickering across his features. He had expected contact, expected to feel his fist connect, to hear the satisfying sound of impact. Instead, he was standing alone in the center of the mats while the small woman he had dismissed stood 3 feet away, untouched. "Lucky," he growled. "That will not happen again." He came at her again, faster this time. Combinations he had clearly drilled thousands of times. Punches and kicks flowing together with the precision of a trained fighter. None of them landed. Alara moved through his attacks like water around stone. She did not block, did not strike back. She simply was not where his fists and feet were trying to be. Every swing met air. Every kick found nothing. The murmurs started in the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, and something else. Fear. Pritchard stopped, breathing harder now. Sweat glistened on his forehead. He had thrown everything at her, and she had not even raised her hands. "What the hell are you?" he demanded. Alara met his eyes. For a long moment, she did not answer. Then she reached up and began to remove her jacket. The movement sent a ripple through the crowd. Marines leaned forward, craning their necks to see. Pritchard watched with narrowed eyes, trying to understand what was happening. The jacket fell away. Beneath it, wrapped around the waist of her standard-issue undershirt, was a black belt. Not new, not pristine. This belt was worn smooth from years of use. Its fabric faded from countless hours of training and sweat and combat. Gasps echoed through the gym. Pritchard stared at the belt like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. His jaw worked silently. His confidence, that unshakable arrogance that had carried him through 3 years of dominance, wavered visibly. "That is impossible," he said. "You are a supply clerk. I was a supply clerk." Alara's voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Before that, I was a Marine Corps martial arts instructor. Before that, I was a combat Marine who spent 9 hours defending wounded brothers against 47 enemy fighters in Syria. 12 of those kills were hand-to-hand. She let the words settle over the crowd. You want to know who I am, Staff Sergeant? I am someone who spent 3 years learning how to kill with my hands. Then I spent 3 years learning how to stop. She stepped forward, and for the first time, Pritchard stepped back. The difference between us is not skill. It is not training. The difference is that I have been trying very hard not to hurt you, and you have been making that very difficult. From the edge of the room, a new voice cut through the silence. Corporal Vance. Alara turned her head. Standing in the doorway of the gym, his arms crossed over his chest, was Master Sergeant Waylon Cross. Her old instructor, the man who had shaped her into what she was. He said nothing else. Just her name. A reminder. Anchor. She turned back to Pritchard. The staff sergeant's face had gone pale. But beneath the fear, she could see the anger still burning. The wounded pride that would not let him back down, even now, even knowing what she was. I do not care how many people you killed in some desert, he snarled. This is my base, my gym, and you're going to learn your place. He attacked, and this time, Alara did not just dodge. Pritchard came at her with everything he had. A wild overhand right followed by a lunging takedown attempt. The kind of desperate aggression that worked against opponents who panicked. The kind that created openings against opponents who did not. Alara sidestepped the punch and sprawled against the takedown, her hips dropping low as her hands found purchase on his shoulders. She redirected his momentum, sending him stumbling past her. Before he could recover, she was already moving, a controlled strike to his ribs. Not hard enough to break anything, just hard enough to let him know she could. Pritchard gasped and spun to face her. His hand went to his side where she had connected. Confusion and pain warred across his features. The crowd had gone completely silent. Every Marine in that gym understood what they were witnessing. This was not a fight. This was a demonstration. Pritchard reset his stance and came again. Faster this time, more technical. A jab-cross combination followed by a low kick aimed at her lead leg. Textbook striking. The kind of combination that had put 3 Marines in the hospital this year. Alara read it like a children's book. She parried the jab, slipped the cross, and checked the kick with her shin. Then she countered. A palm strike to his chest that sent him stumbling backward. A sweep that took his legs out from under him. He hit the mat hard, the impact echoing through the silent gym. She stepped back and let him rise. Stay down, she said quietly. This does not have to continue. Pritchard pushed himself to his feet. His breathing was ragged now. Sweat soaked through his shirt. But the rage in his eyes had not diminished. If anything, it had grown. You think you can humiliate me? His voice cracked. You think you can come into my house and make me look weak? He charged. This time there was no technique, no training. Just raw fury channeled in a fist that swung wildly at anything they could reach. It was the kind of attack that worked through sheer, overwhelming force. The kind that broke people who did not know how to handle it. Alara handled it. She moved through his assault like a ghost, deflecting what she could not avoid, absorbing what she could not deflect. He was strong, stronger than she had expected. One of his punches grazed her shoulder and sent a spike of pain down her arm. Another caught the edge of her jaw, snapping her head to the side. But she had taken worse. So much worse. The memories flickered at the edges of her vision. The Syrian compound. The endless waves of fighters. The moment she had realized ammunition was gone and the only weapons left were her hands. She felt the old calm settling over her. The clarity that came when everything else fell away. In that space, there was no fear, no doubt, no hesitation, only movement, only efficiency, only the cold mathematics of combat. Pritchard threw a haymaker that would have ended the fight if it connected. Alara ducked under it, stepped inside his guard, and struck. Liver shot, precise, devastating, the kind of blow that shut down the body's ability to fight regardless of what the mind wanted. Pritchard folded. His legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, gasping for air that would not come. The crowd stirred. Whispers rippled through the Marines. Some looked away. Others leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes from what was happening. Alara stood over him. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. Everything in her training screamed to finish it, to put him down completely, to eliminate the threat. But she was not in Syria anymore. And Pritchard, for all his cruelty, was not an enemy combatant. He was a bully, a broken man who had built his identity on making others feel small. And breaking him further would not make anything better. She stepped back. Pritchard looked up at her, with hatred burning in his eyes. His hand pressed against his side where the liver shot had landed. His body was failing him, but his pride would not let him quit. "This is not over," he wheezed. "Yes, it is." Alara's voice was calm. "You can barely breathe. You cannot stand. This fight ended the moment it started. The only question now is whether you are smart enough to realize it." For a long moment, the gym held its breath. Then Pritchard moved. It was not a punch, not a kick. His hand shot toward her throat, fingers curved into claws. A desperation move, the kind of attack that fighters threw when they had nothing left, when their only goal was to inflict damage regardless of the cost. Alara caught his wrist, the same wrist she had caught in the corridor 3 days ago. But this time, she did not simply hold it. She twisted. The joint lock was instantaneous and absolute. Pritchard's arm bent at an angle that his body was not designed to accommodate. He screamed. The sound was high and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. Alara held the lock at the edge of damage. One more degree of rotation and his elbow would dislocate. One more pound of pressure and his shoulder would separate. She could feel the tendons straining, could feel how close he was to permanent injury. The Syria memories roared back. Men screaming just like this. The wet snap of breaking bones. The terrible efficiency of her own hands doing what they had been trained to do. Her vision blurred. Corporal Vance. Master Sergeant Cross's voice cut through the noise in her head. Not loud, not commanding, just her name, spoken with the quiet authority of a man who had seen 1,000 warriors walk the edge she was walking now. She looked up, found his eyes across the room. He said nothing else, but in his gaze, she saw the question he had asked her on the phone. "Can you stop yourself?" The answer had to be yes. It had to be. Alara took a breath, then another. She felt the rage receding, the cold efficiency of combat giving way to something warmer, something human. She released Pritchard's arm. He collapsed onto the mat, cradling his wrist against his chest. Tears streamed down his face. The invincible staff sergeant, the terror of Miramar, reduced to a sobbing heap on the floor of his own gym. Alara stepped back. Her hands were trembling now, not from exertion, from the effort of holding herself back. "I spent 3 years learning how to kill with my hands," she said. Her voice was steady despite the trembling. "And I spent 3 years learning how to stop." She looked down at Pritchard. "You are a bully with a belt. I am a weapon trying to be human. And tonight, I chose to be human." She turned and walked toward the edge of the mats. "Stay down," she said without looking back. "We're finished here." Behind her, Declan Pritchard did not move. Across the gym, Mr. Basilio's eyes glistened with tears. The 2 Marines who had been guarding him had stepped away, their faces pale with shock. And at the doorway, Master Sergeant Cross gave a single slow nod. But the night was not over yet. Alara had taken 3 steps toward the edge of the mats when she heard it. The rustle of movement behind her, the sharp intake of breath from the crowd, and then Hollister's voice cutting through the silence. "Corporal Vance, look out." She turned. Pritchard was on his feet. How he had managed it with the damage she had inflicted, she did not know. Adrenaline, rage, the desperate refusal of a man whose entire identity was crumbling around him. Whatever the reason, he was up, and he was moving toward her with murder in his eyes. But it was not his fist that made her blood run cold. It was the knife, a tactical folder, blade already extended, clutched in his right hand. Standard Marine issue, the kind every service member carried, the kind that could open a throat in less than a second. The crowd erupted. Marines shouted warnings. Some rushed forward. Others froze. The carefully maintained illusion of a fair fight shattered in an instant. Pritchard did not care. He was beyond caring, beyond reason, beyond anything except the burning need to hurt the woman who had destroyed him. "You think you can walk away?" His voice was raw, broken. You think you can humiliate me and just leave? He slashed at her face. Alara leaned back. The blade whistled past her nose, close enough that she felt the displaced air. Before she could counter, he was slashing again. Wild, desperate. The movements of a man who had abandoned any pretense of skill in favor of pure violence. She retreated. One step. Two. Her mind racing through options. Disarmtechnique. Counterknife protocols. The 100 different ways she had been trained to neutralize an armed opponent. Every single one of them ended with Pritchard seriously injured or dead. Put it down, she said. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around them. Put the knife down, and this ends here. Pritchard laughed. It was an ugly sound, more sob than humor. Ends here? Nothing ends here. You have taken everything from me. My reputation, my respect, everything I have built on this base. He lunged again. She sidestepped, caught his wrist, and twisted. The knife clattered to the mat, but he was already swinging with his other hand, a wild punch that caught her in the temple. Stars exploded across her vision. She stumbled, felt his hands closing around her throat. The world narrowed to a single point of focus. His grip, her airway, the darkness creeping in at the edges of her sight. Syria came rushing back, not as fragments this time, not as memories, as reality. She was there again, in the dust, in the blood, fighting for her life against men who wanted her dead. Her hands found his wrists, found the pressure points, found the angles that would break his grip. But she did not break his grip. She broke his arm. The snap was audible across the gym. Pritchard screamed and released her, staggering backward with his forearm bent at an angle that made several Marines turn away in horror. Alara gasped for air. Her throat burned. Her vision swam, but she was still standing, still fighting, still alive. Pritchard collapsed onto the mats, his broken arm cradled against his chest. The screaming had stopped, replaced by a high keening sound that barely seemed human. Around them, the gym had descended into chaos. Marines shouting, someone calling for a medic, the clatter of the dropped knife being kicked away from the mats. Through it all, Alara stood motionless. She stared at her hands, the hands that had just shattered bone, the hands that had done worse, so much worse, in a Syrian compound 18 months ago. She had tried so hard, tried to be something other than what she was, tried to leave the weapon behind and become a person again. And in less than a second, all of that had been stripped away. Master Sergeant Cross was beside her. She had not seen him approach, had not heard his footsteps over the ringing in her ears. Alara. His voice was steady, anchoring. Look at me. She could not tear her eyes away from the man writhing on the mat before her. You did what you had to do, Cross continued. He came at you with a knife. You defended yourself. I broke his arm. He was choking you. He would have killed you. Cross's hand found her shoulder. What you did was not murder. It was survival. The same thing you did in Syria. The same thing any Marine would do. Finally, she looked at him. There were tears on her face. She had not realized she was crying. I did not want this, she whispered. I came here to get away from this. To be someone else. Cross held her gaze. You're someone else. The woman I trained 3 years ago would not have stopped. Would not have given him a chance to submit. Would not have walked away. He squeezed her shoulder. You held back until he gave you no choice. That is not a weapon, Alara. That is a warrior. Corporal Vance. Staff Sergeant Pritchard. The voice came from the entrance of the gym. Alara turned to see Captain Nadira Okonkwo standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her, 2 military police officers surveyed the scene with professional detachment. My office, Okonkwo said. Now, medics had arrived. They were tending to Pritchard, stabilizing his arm, loading him onto a stretcher. He was conscious but barely coherent, his face gray with shock and pain. As the stretcher passed Alara, his eyes found hers. For a moment, the hatred was still there, the rage, the wounded pride. But beneath all of that, she saw something else. Fear, real fear, the kind that came from finally understanding what you were dealing with. From realizing that all your power, all your posturing, all your carefully constructed dominance meant nothing against someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. Pritchard looked away first. Alara followed Captain Okonkwo out of the gym, Master Sergeant Cross falling in his step beside her. The crowd parted before them, Marines pressing back against the walls to let them pass. No one spoke, but as she walked through the doorway, Alara heard a single voice rise from the silence behind her. "Hollister, that is what courage looks like," he said. "Remember it." She did not look back, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the trauma and the guilt and the fear, something shifted. Maybe she was not just a weapon after all. Maybe she never had been. The walk to Building 1100 felt longer than it should have. The night air was cool against Alara's skin, carrying the salt smell of the Pacific. Her throat still ached where Pritchard's hands had been. Her temple throbbed where his fist had connected. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on her chest. She had broken a man's arm, shattered bone with her bare hands, while 50 Marines watched. It did not matter that he had come at her with a knife. It did not matter that he had been choking the life out of her. All that mattered was the sound, that terrible snap echoing through the gym. The sound of everything she had tried to leave behind coming back to claim her. Captain Okonkwo's office was on the second floor. Sparse, functional, the kind of space that belonged to someone who cared more about results than appearances. A single photograph sat on the desk. A younger Okonkwo in desert camouflage, surrounded by Marines, somewhere that looked like Afghanistan. "Sit down," the captain said. Alara sat. Cross remained standing near the door, his presence a silent reassurance. Okonkwo studied her for a long moment. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, giving nothing away. "I have been building a file on Staff Sergeant Pritchard for 18 months, she said finally. 18 months of complaints that went nowhere. Witnesses who refused to testify. Evidence that disappeared before it could be documented. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder, dropping on the desk between them. 3 hospitalizations, 14 informal complaints, 2 attempted transfers that were blocked by people above my pay grade, and not a single official action taken because everyone was too afraid of his connections to speak up." Alara said nothing. There was nothing to say. Tonight, that changed. Okonkwo leaned forward. "I have 37 witnesses who saw Staff Sergeant Pritchard attack you with a deadly weapon after you had already defeated him in unarmed combat. 37 witnesses who saw you defend yourself against a man who was actively trying to kill you." She paused. "I also have 37 witnesses who saw you give him every opportunity to stop, who saw you hold back when you could have ended him, who saw you choose restraint right up until the moment he left you no choice." The words hung in the air. Alara felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not realized she was holding. "What happens now?" she asked. Okonkwo glanced across, then back at Alara. "Staff Sergeant Pritchard is being transported to the Naval Hospital. His arm will require surgery. Once he is medically cleared, he will face a court-martial for assault with a deadly weapon, conduct unbecoming, and about a dozen other charges that have been waiting for someone brave enough to press them." She tapped the folder. "These complaints are being reopened. Every single one. Witnesses are already coming forward. It seems your example tonight reminded a lot of people what courage looks like." Alara thought of Hollister, of his voice cutting through the silence of the gym, of all the young Marines who had suffered under Pritchard's reign and never spoken up because they believed no one would listen. "What about me?" she asked. Okonkwo's expression softened slightly. "You defended yourself against an armed attacker. That is not a crime. That is survival. As far as this command is concerned, you're a Marine who did exactly what she was trained to do." There was a knock at the door. One of the MPs entered, carrying a tablet. "Ma'am, the witness statements are coming in. You should see this." Okonkwo took the tablet and scrolled through it. Her eyebrows rose. 13 statements already. All consistent. All confirming that Corporal Vance acted in self-defense. She looked up at Alara. "It seems you have more friends on this base than you realized." Alara thought of the Marines who had avoided her all day. The whispers, the sidelong glances, the fear in their eyes when she walked past. They were not her friends. They were people who had been waiting for someone to show them that standing up was possible. "There is something else," The MP continued. Lance Corporal Hollister is outside. He says he has additional information about previous incidents involving Staff Sergeant Pritchard. Says he is ready to make an official statement. Okonkwo nodded. Send him in. Hollister entered the office looking nervous but determined. His jaw was set. His shoulders were squared. He looked like a different man than the one who had sat in her car that afternoon, confessing his shame in whispered tones. Ma'am, he said, addressing Okonkwo. 3 months ago, Staff Sergeant Pritchard assaulted me in the gym after an unofficial poker game. He beat me for 20 minutes while his friends watched. He told me if I ever reported it, he would make it look like I attacked him first. He took a breath. I never reported it because I was afraid, because I thought no one would believe me, because I thought his connections made him untouchable. He looked at Alara. But tonight I saw someone stand up to him, someone who was afraid too, but did it anyway. And I realized that being afraid is not the same as being helpless. He turned back to Okonkwo. I am ready to make a full statement, and I know at least 4 other Marines who will do the same once they hear that someone finally broke the silence. Okonkwo nodded slowly. Have a seat, Lance Corporal. This is going to be a long night. The hours that followed blurred together. Statement after statement. Marines filtering into Building 1100 to add their voices to the growing chorus of accusations against Pritchard. Some of them Alara recognized. Others were strangers. All of them had the same look in their eyes. Relief. Finally, relief. By 3 in the morning, the file on Captain Okonkwo's desk had tripled in size. Enough evidence to bury Pritchard's career 10 times over. Enough testimony to ensure he would never hurt another Marine again. Cross found her in the hallway during a break, sitting on a bench with her head in her hands. How are you holding up? He asked. I do not know. She looked up at him. I spent 18 months trying to convince myself I was not a fighter anymore, that I could be something else, something normal. And now I do not know what I am. Cross sat down beside her. Let me tell you something I should have told you 3 years ago, he said. When I first started training you, I thought I was creating a weapon, a tool for the Corps to point at enemies and unleash. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was wrong. He turned to face her. You were never a weapon, Alara. You were always a protector. The skills I taught you, they were not for destruction. They were for defense, for keeping people safe, for standing between the innocent and those who would hurt them. He gestured toward the office where statements were still being taken. Look at what you did tonight. Not the fight, not the broken arm. Look at what came after. 30 Marines finding their courage because you found yours first. A predator being held accountable because you refused to let him win. He put his hand on her shoulder. That is not what weapons do. That is what heroes do. Alara felt the tears coming again. This time, she did not try to stop them. I am tired, she whispered. So tired of fighting. I know. Cross squeezed her shoulder. But sometimes the most important fights are not against enemies. They are for something. For someone. For the person you want to become. He stood up. Get some rest, Corporal. Tomorrow is going to be a new day. He walked away, leaving her alone in the quiet hallway with the weight of his words and the first faint stirrings of something she had not felt in 18 months. Hope. The sun rose over Miramar with the kind of golden light that made everything feel possible. Alara had not slept. She had spent the remaining hours of darkness in the break room of Building 1100, drinking bad coffee and watching the steady stream of Marines coming forward to add their names to the record. By dawn, the count had reached 53 statements. 53 people who had been hurt, intimidated, or silenced by Declan Pritchard. 53 voices that had been waiting for permission to speak. Ramona found her there as the first shift was arriving for duty. You look terrible, the gunnery sergeant said, settling into the chair across from her. I feel terrible. Ramona smiled. You should feel proud. Do you have any idea what you started last night? Alara shook her head. I did not start anything. I just did not know how to stop. That is the same thing sometimes. Ramona leaned forward. I have been on this base for 6 years, Alara. 6 years of watching Pritchard operate. 6 years of knowing something was wrong and not being able to prove it. Do you know how many times I wish someone would just stand up to him? She reached across the table and took Alara's hand. You did that. You stood up. And now everyone else is standing with you. The words should have felt good, should have felt like vindication. But all Alara could think about was the sound of breaking bone. The look in Pritchard's eyes as he was carried away on that stretcher. I broke his arm, she said quietly. He came at you with a knife. He was choking you. Ramona's voice was firm. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. I know, but there is no pride in it either. Ramona studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. That is what makes you different from him, she said. He would have been proud. He would have bragged about it for years. But you understand that violence, even justified violence, costs something. That understanding is what separates warriors from bullies. She squeezed Alara's hand and stood. Get some rest. The hard part is over. But the hard part was not over. Not quite. At noon, Captain Okonkwo summoned Alara back to her office. The captain looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from doing difficult work that mattered. Staff Sergeant Pritchard's court-martial has been scheduled, she said. Given the number of witnesses and the severity of the charges, his legal team is already discussing plea options. Either way, his career in the Marine Corps is finished. Alara nodded. She had expected as much. There is something else. Okonkwo pulled a document from her desk. Master Sergeant Cross submitted a recommendation this morning. He believes Miramar needs a new MCMAP instructor, someone who can teach not just technique, but judgment, restraint, the difference between fighting and defending. She slid the document across the desk. He recommended you. Alara stared at the paper. The words blurred before her eyes. I'm a supply clerk, she said. You were a supply clerk. Okonkwo's voice was gentle. Before that, you were one of the finest combat instructors the Corps has ever produced. Your record in Syria speaks for itself. And what you demonstrated last night, the control, the restraint, the willingness to give your opponent every chance to stop, that is exactly what we need young Marines to learn. She leaned back in her chair. The position is yours if you want it. No pressure, no expectations. But I think you should consider it. Alara picked up the document. Her hands were trembling slightly. I spent 18 months trying to get away from fighting, she said, trying to be someone who did not know how to hurt people. And how'd that work out for you? The question hung in the air. Alara thought about the corridor, the parking lot, the gym, all the moments when her training had risen up despite her best efforts to suppress it. Not well, she admitted. Okonkwo nodded. Running from what you are does not change what you are. It just makes you unprepared when the moment comes. But there is another option. What is that? Accept it. Master it. Use it to help others. She gestured toward the window, toward the base, sprawling beyond. There are young Marines out there who will face violence someday. Some of them will freeze. Some of them will panic. Some of them will do things they regret because no one taught them how to control what they are capable of. She met Alara's eyes. You could be the one who teaches them, not just how to fight, how to choose, how to know when to strike and when to walk away, how to be warriors instead of weapons. The words echoed what Cross had told her the night before, what Mr. Basilio had said outside the gym, what she had been slowly realizing since the moment she had caught Pritchard's fist in that corridor. She had spent so long trying to escape her past, trying to pretend she was something other than what she was. But the truth was simpler than that. She was a protector. She had always been a protector. The skills she carried were not a curse. They were a gift, and gifts were meant to be shared. I will think about it, she said. Okonkwo smiled. Take your time. The position will be here when you are ready. Alara left the office and walked out into the afternoon sun. The base looked different somehow. The same buildings, the same vehicles, the same flags snapping in the coastal wind. But the weight she had been carrying felt lighter. She found Mr. Basilio outside Building 6240, mopping the sidewalk with his usual quiet dignity. He looked up as she approached, and his weathered face creased into a smile. Corporal Vance, I was hoping I would see you today. How are you feeling, Mr. Basilio? The old man chuckled. I should be asking you that question. You are the one who fought a battle last night. Alara sat down on a nearby bench. She suddenly felt very tired. They offer me a job, she said. Teaching. Combat instruction. Mr. Basilio set down his mop and joined her on the bench. And what did you say? I said I would think about it. She stared at her hands. The same hands that had healed wounds and broken bones. The same hands that had protected and destroyed. I do not know if I am ready. Mr. Basilio was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. When I came home from Vietnam, I did not know what to do with myself. I had spent 2 years learning how to save lives under fire, how to run toward danger when everyone else was running away. And then suddenly I was back in the world, and none of those skills seemed to matter anymore. He looked at her. I spent years feeling useless, feeling like the best part of me had been left behind in the jungle. And then one day, I realized something. What? The skills I learned were not just for war. They were for service, for helping people, for making a difference in whatever way I could. He gestured at the mop, the bucket, the building behind them. I'm a janitor now. I clean floors and empty trash and make sure this base runs smoothly. It is not saving lives under fire, but it is service. It is contribution. It is using what I have to help others. He turned to face her fully. You have skills that most people cannot imagine. You have walked through fire and come out stronger. The question is not whether you're ready to teach. The question is whether you are willing to share what you have learned. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes again. She seemed to be doing a lot of crying lately. What if I fail? She whispered. What if I teach someone wrong and they get hurt? Mr. Basilio smiled gently. What if you teach someone right and they save a life? He patted her hand and stood up, retrieving his mop. Think about it, Corporal Vance. But do not think too long. The world needs protectors, and I believe you were born to be one. He returned to his work, humming softly as he mopped. Alara sat on the bench and watched the sun climb higher in the sky, feeling something shift inside her. Not a weapon, a protector. Maybe it was time to start acting like one. 3 days later, Alara walked into the MCMAP training center for the first time as an instructor. The building smelled like sweat and rubber mats, the familiar scent of countless hours spent teaching bodies how to move, how to strike, how to survive. She had avoided this place since arriving at Miramar, had walked past it 100 times without looking, had told herself she was done with that life. Now she stood in the doorway, watching a group of young Marines stretching on the mats, and felt something she had not expected. She felt home. Master Sergeant Cross was waiting for her near the equipment racks. His face betrayed nothing, but there was warmth in his eyes. Instructor Vance, he said, welcome back. The title felt strange on her shoulders, like a uniform she had outgrown and was learning to wear again. I do not know if I am ready for this, she admitted. Nobody is ever ready. Cross handed her a clipboard with the day's training schedule. That is why we prepare. That is why we practice. That is why we teach. He gestured toward the Marines on the mats. These are your students. Most of them have never been in a real fight, never had to defend themselves outside of controlled training. They do not know what violence actually costs. He met her eyes. But you do. And that is exactly what they need to learn. Alara looked at the young faces before her. Eager, nervous, full of the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly tested. She remembered being like them once. Before Syria, before the convoy, before she learned what her hands were capable of. She stepped onto the mats. The conversations died. Every eye turned toward her. She could see them taking her measure. A small woman in standard training gear. Not what they had expected from the stories that had been circulating around the base. My name is Corporal Vance, she said. Starting today, I am your MCMAP instructor. A few of them exchanged glances. One Marine in the back, a tall kid with broad shoulders and the kind of swagger that reminded her uncomfortably of Pritchard, smirked slightly. I know what you have heard about me, she continued. Some of it is true. Some of it is not. What matters is what happens in this room. She began to pace slowly along the edge of the mats. I'm going to teach you how to fight, how to defend yourselves and others, how to use your bodies as weapons when weapons are not available. She stopped. But first, I'm going to teach you something more important. The tall Marine in the back raised his hand. His name tag read Erickson. What is more important than fighting? He asked. His tone carried a hint of challenge. Alara walked toward him. The other Marines shifted nervously, but Erickson held his ground, his smirk still in place. Stand up, she said. He rose slowly, unfolding to his full height. He had at least 8 inches on her, probably 60 pounds. The kind of physical advantage that made people feel invincible. "Hit me," she said. Erickson blinked. "What?" "Hit me. Throw your best punch." He hesitated, looking around at the other Marines. Some of them were grinning now, eager to see what would happen. "I did not want to hurt you," he said. There was condescension in his voice. The assumption that his size made him dangerous and her size made her fragile. Alara smiled slightly. "That is very considerate. Now hit me." Erickson shrugged and threw a punch. It was fast, well-formed, the kind of strike that would have knocked most people flat. Alara was not there. She had moved before his fist arrived, sliding to the side with an economy of motion that made the dodge look effortless. Before Erickson could recover, she had his arm locked and his balance broken. One gentle push, and he was on the mat, staring up at the ceiling with confusion written across his face. She released him and stepped back. "Get up," she said. He scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Again," she said, "and this time mean it." Erickson came at her harder, faster, multiple strikes in combination, the kind of aggressive assault that overwhelmed opponents through sheer pressure. None of it landed. Alara flowed through his attacks like water through rocks. She did not strike back, did not counter, simply was not where his fists were trying to be. After 30 seconds, Erickson was breathing hard and she had not broken a sweat. She stepped back and addressed the class. "Private Erickson is bigger than me, stronger than me, faster than most of you. In a straight contest of physical attributes, he should win every time." She looked at Erickson, who was still trying to catch his breath. But fighting is not about physical attributes. It is about control, awareness, the ability to read your opponent and respond before they complete their action. She turned back to the class. "I could have hurt Private Erickson a dozen times during that exchange. I chose not to. That choice is the most important skill I will teach you." She began to pace again. Anyone can learn to throw a punch. Anyone can learn to cause pain. But knowing when not to fight, knowing how to control your response, knowing the difference between defending yourself and destroying someone else, that is what separates warriors from thugs. She stopped in front of Hollister, who had joined the class at her request. "Some of you will face situations where violence is necessary, where the only way to protect yourself or someone else is to fight. I will teach you how to handle those situations." She looked around the room. "But I will also teach you how to recognize the situations where fighting is not necessary, where walking away is not weakness, but wisdom, where the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength." Erickson raised his hand again. His smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "How do you know the difference?" he asked. "Between when to fight and when not to." Alara considered the question. She thought about the corridor with Pritchard, the parking lot, the gym, all the moments of choice that had led her to this place. "You feel it," she said finally, "in your gut, in your heart. Fighting should always be a last resort, not a first response. If you're looking for reasons to fight, you have already made the wrong choice." She clapped her hands. "Pair up. We're going to start with basic defensive positioning. I want to see how you move before I teach you anything else." The class broke into pairs and began working through basic stances and movements. Alara moved among them, correcting posture, adjusting grips, offering quiet words of encouragement. Hollister caught her eye as she passed. "You are good at this," he said quietly. She paused. "I used to be. I am learning to be again." He nodded toward Erickson, who was now working diligently with a partner, all traces of arrogance gone. "You got through to him. That thing about choice. I think he actually heard it." Alara watched the young Marine for a moment, saw the effort he was putting in, the genuine desire to learn. "That is the point," she said, "not to create fighters, to create people who know how to fight, but choose to be more than that." She moved on to the next pair, but something warm had settled in her chest. This was right. This was what she was meant to do. Not hiding from what she was, not running from her skills, using them to build something, to help others become better versions of themselves. Master Sergeant Cross watched from the edge of the room, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But when Alara glanced his way, she caught the faintest hint of a smile. She smiled back and returned to her students. For the first time in 18 months, Corporal Elara Vance felt like she knew exactly who she was. 6 weeks later, Elara stood in the base auditorium in her dress blues, trying not to fidget. The room was packed. Marines filled every seat, with more standing along the walls and crowding the doorways. She recognized faces from her training classes, from the administrative building, from the gym that night when everything had changed. And in the front row, wearing a suit that looked older than some of the Marines present, sat Mr. Teodoro Basilio. Ramona was beside him, beaming with undisguised pride. Hollister sat on his other side, his posture straighter than she had ever seen it. Even Erickson was there, the tall Marine who had challenged her on that first day of instruction and had since become one of her most dedicated students. Master Sergeant Cross stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the silent room. The Bronze Star with V device is awarded for heroic achievement in connection with combat operations against an enemy of the United States. On September 14th, in northern Syria, Corporal Elara Vance demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. Elara listened to the words as if they were describing someone else. The convoy, the ambush, the 9 hours of hell that had followed. It all felt so distant now, like a story she had read rather than lived. Despite being wounded in the initial attack, Cross continued. Corporal Vance refused evacuation and instead established a defensive position to protect 7 wounded Marines who could not be moved. Over the following 9 hours, she single-handedly repelled multiple enemy assaults, engaging combatants at ranges from 300 meters to hand-to-hand distance. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the audience. When ammunition was exhausted, Corporal Vance continued to defend her position using only her training in close combat. She successfully protected all 7 wounded Marines until reinforcements arrived. Her actions that day save the lives of her fellow Marines and reflect the highest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. Cross looked up from the citation. 3 years ago, Corporal Vance was offered this medal and declined. She did not feel she deserved recognition for the actions she took that day. He met her eyes across the room. She was wrong. He gestured for her to approach the podium. Elara walked forward on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Cross opened a small case and removed the medal. Bronze Star with AV for Valor. The ribbon was crisp and new, but what it represented was anything but. What Corporal Vance did in Syria was not just fighting, Cross said as he pinned the medal to her chest. It was protection. It was sacrifice. It was the decision to put the lives of others before her own safety. He stepped back and saluted. That is what makes a warrior, he said. Not the ability to destroy, the willingness to defend. Elara returned the salute. Her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. Then it was her turn to speak. She had not prepared remarks, had not known what she would say until she was standing before the microphone, looking out at all those faces. 3 years ago, she began, her voice steady despite everything. I thought this medal was for the worst day of my life. I thought it was recognition for killing, for violence, for becoming something I never wanted to be. She touched the medal on her chest. I was wrong. She looked at Mr. Basilio in the front row, at Ramona, at Hollister and Erickson and all the young Marines who had passed through her training in the past 6 weeks. What happened in Syria was not about taking lives. It was about saving them. The 7 Marines I protected that day went home to their families. They are fathers now, husbands. They have lives because I was willing to stand between them and those who would have killed them. Her voice grew stronger. I spent a long time running from what I am, trying to pretend I was something else, someone normal, someone who did not know how to hurt people. She shook her head. But the truth is, knowing how to fight is not the same as wanting to fight. Having the ability to cause harm is not the same as being harmful. What matters is the choice. What matters is why we do what we do. She found Cross in the crowd. Someone very wise told me recently that I was never a weapon. I was always a protector. It took me a long time to understand what that meant. She straightened her shoulders. I am a Marine. I am an instructor. I am someone who has walked through fire and come out the other side. And I am choosing to use everything I have learned, everything I am capable of, to help others become the best versions of themselves. She looked directly at Mr. Basilio. Not weapons. Protectors. The old man's eyes glistened. He nodded once, slowly, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Alara stepped back from the microphone. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the room and spread outward like a wave. Marines rose to their feet. The sound built and built until it filled the auditorium, echoing off the walls and washing over her in a tide of recognition and respect. She had not wanted this, had not sought it, but standing there, surrounded by the people she had helped and the community she had become part of, she finally understood why it mattered. Not for her, for them, for the young Marines who needed to see that courage was not the absence of fear, that strength was not the same as violence, that the hardest choice was often to show restraint when you had the power to destroy. After the ceremony, Mr. Basilio found her outside the auditorium. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and the weight of the medal on her chest felt different than she had expected. Not heavy, grounding. "Corporal Vance," he said. "Or should I say Instructor Vance now?" Alara smiled. "Alara is fine." The old man nodded. "I wanted to tell you something. Something I've been thinking about since that day in the corridor." "What is that?" Mr. Basilio looked out across the base, his eyes distant. "When you stepped between me and Staff Sergeant Pritchard, I thought you were very brave. Very foolish, but very brave." He turned to face her. "But now I understand. You are not just protecting an old janitor. You were protecting yourself, the person you wanted to become, the choice you wanted to make." He took her hand in both of his. "You taught me something, Alara. You taught me that it is never too late to stand up. Never too late to be who you were meant to be. I'm 70 years old, and you taught me that." Alara felt the tears finally spill over. She did not try to stop them. "You taught me something too," she said. "You taught me that service does not end when a uniform comes off. That helping others is not about what you can do. It is about what you choose to do." Mr. Basilio smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep within. "Then we have taught each other well." He released her hand and stepped back. "Go," he said. "Your students are waiting, and I have floors to mop." He walked away, humming softly, the same melody she had heard that first day in the corridor. Alara watched him go. Then she turned and walked toward the training center, where a new group of young Marines was waiting to learn. Not how to fight, how to choose. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about what resonated most. Have you ever witnessed someone choose restraint when they had the power to destroy? That is the truest strength of all. Drop a comment and let us know. The mat room was already filling with eager faces when she arrived. Hollister was there, helping students stretch. Erickson was demonstrating a basic stance to a nervous-looking private. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air. Alara stepped onto the mats and felt the familiar surface beneath her feet. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Instructor Vance, and today I'm going to teach you the most important lesson you will ever learn." A young Marine in the front row raised his hand. "What is that, ma'am?" Alara smiled. "How to be more than what you are capable of. How to choose peace when you have the power for war. How to be protectors instead of weapons." She looked around at all of them, at the future of the Corps, at the men and women who would face their own fire someday. "That is what real strength looks like," she said. "Now let us begin."